Hey friends, today in honor of Women's History Month, I'm going to read another book about a really strong, smart woman called Grace Hopper, Queen of Computer Code, written by Laurie Wallmark, illustrated by Katy Wu. Now, the computer field is not another area that women didn't really work in very often, and so it's really cool that she was so great at coding computers. So let's see what happens in her life. Now, I've heard of her, but I don't know anything about her, so it's kind of cool. So here she is. It says software tester, workplace jester, order seeker, well-known speaker, gremlin finder, software minder, clever thinker, lifelong tinker, cherished mentor, ace inventor, avid reader, naval leader, rule breaker, chance taker, troublemaker, amazing grace. Sorry, this is a new book, and sometimes the pages stick together. Let me make sure I didn't miss one. I guess not. Grace leaned back in her chair and yawned. Once again, she'd worked far into the night writing computer code. Grace's latest computer program, one to guide naval missiles, was almost complete. All that was left was to check her work. Grace reviewed the code line by line, making sure she hadn't made any mistakes. When she finished, Grace set down her pencil and frowned. The last section of her program, a bit of code that multiplied numbers, looked familiar. She checked back through her work and found she had written that same code before, over and over and over again. So in case you probably already know this, but computer code is basically a language that tells computers what to do, but it's obviously not English, and so you have to be able to write it to make computers do the things you want them to do, which is pretty cool. Grace snorted. What a colossal waste of time. There had to be a better way. Why not make the computer do the work? Computers were good at doing boring jobs. I was lazy as all get out. I never wanted to do anything over again. That's what she's saying. She figured out a way to store pieces of a program like her multiplication code inside the machine. When she needed to use that code in another program, all Grace had to do was tell the computer where to find it. The computer then joined together the many bits of code into one complete program. No one had ever done that before. Grace was the first. So just to make sure you get it, sometimes she was trying to tell programs to do the same thing, and so she was reusing code over and over again. And so this time it's stored in the computer, so all she has to do is tell the computer, hey, use this code, and it automatically does it, which is great because it saves her time from doing it. Even as a child, Grace loved to tinker with gadgets and learn new ideas. She wanted to understand how things worked so she could make them better. When Grace was 7, she unscrewed the back of her alarm clock and took a peek. She reached in and spring! Out popped a spring, followed by several gears. One rolled across the floor and under the bed. Grace scooped up the parts and tried to put them back together. No matter which piece she put where, she couldn't get the clock to run. So I know I'd like to talk about personal things in these books, so I'm going to tell you something else. My dad also designed computer systems, and that's what he did for NASA. He designed computer systems that they use in space shuttles and spaceships, so that was pretty interesting. And he was a lot like Grace. When I was a little girl, you know what he would do? So TVs were a lot different back then. In the middle of the night, he would take apart our whole TV and all the parts would be on the table. Now, the TV wasn't broken. He just wanted to see how it worked. And then he would put it all back together again and the TV worked. That was kind of what he did for fun. She needed another clock that she could study, one that still worked. Grace sprinted from room to room. Clock by clock, she fiddled with gears and springs, levers and pins. She arranged them this and that. 7 clocks later, 7-year-old Grace understood what made the clocks tick. When Grace's mother discovered the many jumbles of clock parts scattered around the house, all she could do was laugh. After all, Grace was just being Grace. That's pretty cool. So she took apart 7 clocks to figure out how they worked. I personally have no idea how clocks work. Once Grace figured out how clocks work, she moved on to bigger challenges. She followed a complicated blueprint and constructed a dollhouse made of stone. But there were no stairs. How could her dolls get to the top floor? Not a problem for junior engineer Grace. She opened her toy construction kit and laid out everything she'd need: nuts, bolts, metal pieces, and an electric motor. It took some experimentation, but Grace figured it out. Now her dolls had an elevator to go upstairs. That's pretty cool. Grace delighted in learning difficult concepts. The harder the better. While her schoolmates wore frilly dresses and learned to be young ladies, Grace studied math and science. Her bedroom overflowed with books and scientific equipment. That's pretty cool. So look, here's the elevator she built for her dolls. And no one helped her. She just figured it out on her own. That's pretty cool. Oh, and this is another one of her quotes. If you've gotten a good idea and you know it's going to work, go ahead and do it, which is good advice. She raced through high school classes and finished 2 years early. Grace couldn't wait to start college. More classes, more learning, more fun. On the day her college entrance grades arrived, Grace's hands trembled. She ripped open the envelope and proudly read aloud to her parents that many high marks in math and science. When she reached the grade for Latin, Grace fell silent. Failed! She had failed Latin! Without Latin, Grace couldn't go to college. Without college, Grace couldn't be a mathematician. Without math, Grace couldn't be Grace. Grace waved to her schoolmates as they left for college without her. Nothing would stop her from joining them next year. She held her head high and returned to her studies. Working hard, Grace even conquered Latin. At the end of the year, she passed all her exams. With her trunks packed and her math books in hand, Grace left for Vassar College, an all-women's school. It's still around and it's not an all-women's school anymore. Some of her classmates took classes called Husbands and Wives and Motherhood, but not Grace. Her favorite subjects were math and physics. So back when Grace was in college, they assumed that women wouldn't be working and they really didn't want to do anything but get married and have kids, and they didn't have any career plans in mind, which is not true, especially for Grace, who was interested in math and science, and that was very unusual. Grace did more in college than just study. Whenever there was a fun adventure to be found, she was always the first in line. Her personal motto was, dare and do. When a barnstormer came to town offering plane rides, Grace rushed to sign up. She pulled herself up into the seat behind the pilot and adjusted her goggles. With a deafening roar, the propeller sputtered into action. The biplane rattled across the field and lifted off. With each loop-de-loop through the air, Grace's grin grew wider and wider. So they have all these quotes from her, and this one says, I squandered all my money. It cost $10, and up we went in the plane. That was kind of scary. So they were doing loop-de-loops. I don't think I'd want to do that personally. Because of Grace's hard work and intelligence, the other students respected her abilities. They often came to her for help with their studies. One day, her fellow students entered the room only to see a bathtub filled to the brim with water. Grace invited a volunteer to step into the tub, clothes and all. Water sloshed over the edges and flooded the floor. The students burst into laughter. Grace explained the reason for this tidal wave. The volume of the student's body pushed out the same volume of water. The result, one soggy student wrapped in a towel and one math lesson never forgotten. So you see what that means? When the water was up to the top, and when she got in, her body space pushed all that water out to make room for her body. So that's the lesson she was teaching her friends. When Grace moved on to graduate school at Yale University, there was only one other woman in her class. This didn't bother Grace in the least. So you know what's sad is a lot of times when women went to these really big colleges like Yale, which is a really famous university, the men in the class, the other kids, I mean, they were still kids, they were college kids, didn't like her and they were mean and they'd be rude. Grace wanted to share her passion for math, so she took a job teaching at Vassar College. Her classes were always both practical and fun. Even though Grace loved teaching, America was now at war and needed the best mathematicians to design weapons. Patriotic Grace wanted to help her country, so she tried to enlist in the Navy. That proved to be a problem. Here's another quote. Our young people are the future. We must provide for them. Based on the Navy's requirements for new recruits at the time, Grace was too old and too skinny to enlist. She was 36 and weighed only 105 pounds. Grace could be very persuasive, however. It took her more than a year, but Grace convinced the Navy that they needed her. So after she went to college, this is a little confusing because it made it sound like she just was teaching while she was in college. So she went to Yale University to graduate school. That's what you do after college. And then she became a teacher at the college where she went. And so when she was 36, she tried to go into the Navy. Faithfulness in all things, my motto is, you see, the world will be a better place when all agree with me. Wouldn't it be nice if everybody agreed with you all the time? Because of her superior math skills, Grace was assigned to write programs for one of the first computers ever built, the Mark I. Only a few people had ever programmed before, so she had to learn how to do it on her own. One late summer day, a coworker burst into Grace's office. The new computer, the Mark II, had stopped working. She gasped. This had never happened before, not with any of her programs. Grace thought that it had to be a prank. After all, she loved playing jokes on her coworkers. Maybe the other engineers were getting their revenge, but they weren't. The computer really wasn't working. Do you see how big this computer is? I don't know if you remember, but I think I told you in one of the other stories that the computers at NASA where my dad used to work, they were as big as, they would like fill up the whole classroom. And so this is a pretty big computer, and it's probably not as powerful as your phone is today. Pretty amazing. For hours, Grace and her team reviewed the code, but could find no error. It was as if the green ceramic gremlin that always sat in Grace's office had come to life and sneaked into the machine to make mischief. That was it. Maybe the problem wasn't in her program. Maybe it was in the computer. Grace jumped to her feet and hurried down the hall. The immense computer room usually thrummed with the click of the metal switches and whir of the paper tape. Today, all was silent. I have an insatiable curiosity. It's solving problems. Every time you solve a problem, another one shows up behind it. That's the challenge. So look at all those computers. Like I said, those computers are probably not as powerful as your phone is today. Grace and her team searched everywhere for the problem. Grace used her pocket mirror to check inside the machine. She angled this way and that. No matter where the engineers looked, they didn't see anything wrong. No loose wires or stray sparks, not even a naughty gremlin. The engineers were stumped. They had checked everything. What could be causing the problem? Then someone saw it. A moth was trapped inside, blocking a switch from working properly. Aw, look, there it is. Can you see? See if you can see it better. There it is. So this switch wasn't able to make a connection because the moth was on top of it, and it stopped the whole computer from working. One of the engineers borrowed Grace's eyebrow tweezers and removed the dead moth. The computer started up again with no problem. Being good scientists, Grace and her team taped the moth into the logbook to record their unusual finding. They added a note, first actual case of a computer bug being found. A computer bug, have you ever heard that before? There's a bug in the computer. It's not really a bug, but in this case it really was. Ever since then, because of Grace's sense of humor, computer glitches have been called bugs. And there's a notebook. They taped the moth. And it says, first actual case of bug being found. Early computers didn't understand letters or words, only programs filled with the lines and lines of ones and zeros. As Grace worked on a brand new computer called the UNIVAC 1, she thought about ways to make programming even easier. Not everyone was as comfortable thinking in numbers as she. Grace wanted anyone to be able to use computers, not just scientists and engineers. So it used to be that way. Nobody had computers. I mean, when I was growing up, nobody had a computer. In fact, there was no such thing as computers. And then when they did start being used, it was only in big companies like NASA or scientists who used them. And this language, as I told you, it's like the English language, except it's computer language, and they only used ones and zeros. And you have to do these sequences to make it do what you want to do. That seems very confusing to me. Grace glanced at the wall clock she had rigged to run backward. It reminded her to use her imagination. Unconventional thinking was often the key to solving problems, so she made this clock go backwards. So unconventional thinking means that you're not thinking the way everybody else thinks. You see a problem and you think, I think I can figure that out in a different way. And that means you're using your imagination, right? And you're thinking outside the box, they call it. Humans are allergic to change. They like to say, we've always done it this way. I try to fight that, which is true. People don't really like change that much, but she wanted people to be able to change. To allow her brain a chance to consider new ideas, Grace took a break from programming. She doodled cartoons of gremlins and dragons and other fantastical creatures. While she drew, she asked herself questions. Why should people have to learn a computer language? Why couldn't computers learn people language? They could. Grace invented a program that let people use words to tell the computer what to do. Her program, named Flowmatic, included simple English commands like multiply Flowmatic, translated multiply, and other commands into instructions the computer could understand. Let people write their programs in English. It was common sense. So if you wanted your computer to do something, it's a lot easier to say a word that you already know than try to figure out what it means in ones and zeros, right? This was much easier than programming pages of ones and zeros. With the help of Grace's program, she and her co-workers were able to write code more quickly and with fewer errors. If you make mistakes, the computer's not going to do what you want it to, right? When Grace was 60 years old, the Navy forced her to retire. They said she was too old to serve. It was the saddest day of my life, she said. Within a few months, they realized their mistake and asked her to return for a short 6-month assignment. This short assignment lasted for 20 years. So how old was she then? They made her leave when she was 60? So she worked until she was 80. Grace, now an admiral, finally retired from the Navy for the second time at the age of 80. For almost 50 years, Grace Hopper, the queen of computer code, dedicated her life to solving computer problems. No wonder people called her Amazing Grace. And I told you before, all good nonfiction. Here's a timeline of her life. So she was born in 1906 in New York City. So in 1906, I can tell you there were not many women who were going into math and science. And then she passed away. Let's see. Sorry. Oh, in 1992, she died. And in 2016, she was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, which is such a great honor, but unfortunately she was not alive to find out that she won. And here are some sites if you want to read about other women who are in science. And here is the bibliography. Those are the books that the author used to get information. And here are some of the honors that Grace won in her lifetime. So computers, you guys, since you're a lot younger than I am, obviously, you're really used to computers and you use them for all kinds of things. You use them for school, you use them for fun, you use them for maybe watching a show. But when I was a kid, we didn't have any of those things. No computers at all. We didn't even know what a computer, computers didn't even exist. And we didn't have cell phones. And so people like her have made it possible for people like you to use computers in a way that makes sense and helps you. So that's kind of a neat book. It was kind of fun to learn about somebody who didn't basically do what people said, like you should grow up and be a mom only. She grew up and did what she wanted to do, which was work in computers. I hope you liked learning about Grace Hopper. Happy reading, friends.